Morning, everybody. It is 7 o'clock. The fallout from Partygate is developing into something of a charcuterie board, with Operation Red Meat and now an alleged pork pie plot to oust the PM. From the government today, we'll speak to the Armed Forces Minister James Heappey, the Conservative peer who used to advise Boris Johnson, plus the Shadow Business Secretary Jonathan Reynolds. It is Wednesday, the 19th of January. Pork pie plot, the claims that 20 Conservative MPs are poised to add their weight to plans to topple the Prime Minister over Partygate. After this, yesterday from their leader.
Nobody told me, and nobody said that this was something that was against the rules, that was a breach of the COVID rules.
The rules that he made, of course. Now we'll have the latest twists and turns as the PM prepares for Prime Minister's questions, with an olive branch to backbenchers to announce an easing of Plan B restrictions. Cost of living crisis. The latest inflation figures are out this morning. We'll bring them to you live this hour, and what it means for your family bills. Island evacuations, homes destroyed and water contaminated in Tonga, with a race to get aid there after the underwater volcano eruption.
Don't be complicit. Amnesty International's warning of a sports-washing propaganda exercise at the Beijing Winter Olympics next month.
Also on the programme for you this morning.
Why do I want to know about your son? Because he killed mine. How far back would you like to go? Wherever you need.
We'll also speak to the actress Martha Plimpton about her role in the new Sky film, exploring the aftermath of mass school shootings in the US.
Give it a stir, and what we're after is like a bright yellow paste. Do you see that? This is exactly what we want, so it's quite loose.
And how to cook lean, green meals that don't bust the bank. We'll chat to chef Miguel Barclay about his recipes that only cost £1 per person. Morning, everybody. Big day for the Prime Minister. Another big day for the Prime Minister. Sky News understands that around 20 newly elected Conservative MPs are poised to add their weight to a leadership challenge on the Prime Minister. The MPs who were first elected when they broke down Labour's Red Wall in 2019 met in secret yesterday. It's being called a pork pie plot. Why? Well, because one of the MPs believed to be involved is the MP for Melton Mowbray, famed, of course, for its pork pies. Very good they are too, if you're watching this morning. Now, there is strong speculation Tory MPs may nearly have the amount of letters needed to get a no-confidence vote in Boris Johnson. That is 54. So let's analyse what's needed to trigger that vote of no confidence. A leadership contest can be triggered if 15% of 360 Conservative MPs send handwritten letters to the chair of the 1922 committee, declaring their intention to oust the Prime Minister. A vote of no confidence then commences, where if more than 50% or 181 MPs vote against Mr Johnson, he will be ousted with immediate effect. However, if Mr Johnson happens to win a no-confidence vote, he has the right to remain unchallenged for the next 12 months. Our chief political correspondent John Craig reports.
The haunted look of a Prime Minister on the brink. Boris Johnson faces MPs today, knowing his time as PM may be coming to an end. It's some of these MPs, newly elected, many in so-called red wall seats, just over 2 years ago in 2019, who are leading a mutiny against Mr Johnson. It's claimed 20 of them are poised to submit letters after Prime Minister's questions, demanding a no-confidence vote, taking the number close to the 54 required to trigger a contest. The coup is being called a pork pie plot, because one of the MPs involved represents Rutland and Melton, home of the Melton Mowbray pork pie. The rebels claim Mr Johnson's TV interview yesterday on allegations of Downing Street partying was a disaster.
Nobody told me, and nobody said that this was something that was against the rules, that was a breach of the COVID rules, or we were doing something that wasn't a work event, because frankly, I don't think I can't imagine why on earth it would have gone ahead or why it would have been allowed.
Hi.
Hello, how are you doing? You send the scans?
The consultant.
To the consultant.
Facing a nervous wait to find out his fate, the Prime Minister will today try and resuscitate his faltering leadership by announcing he's ripping up England's Plan B COVID restrictions, which are opposed by so many of his MPs. The changes are likely to include ditching COVID passports and working from home guidance, although mandatory mask wearing in some settings could remain. Before the COVID announcement, however, another make or break PMQs with more questions about Downing Street parties awaits. The Prime Minister heads for the House of Commons and Prime Minister's questions today, knowing that his job is on the line. After his downbeat tone and his forlorn appearance in his TV interview yesterday, he'll be aiming to come out fighting. He'll need to. The mood in Parliament is febrile, and the Prime Minister's position is today more perilous than it's ever been. John Craig, Sky News.
Well, the Minister for the Armed Forces, James Heappey, is with us now. Hello to you, Mr Heappey. Thanks for joining us on the programme this morning. Much appreciated. Challenging time for all ministers. What about this pork pie plot? How much trouble is the Prime Minister in?
Well, I mean, I only know what I've read in the papers overnight, that some colleagues appear to have met to discuss things. I don't think that's surprising. I suspect there's lots of colleagues who are reflecting on what they've heard in their constituencies and are feeling under a lot of pressure right now because the British public are absolutely furious with what they've heard. The Prime Minister has apologised. I can tell colleagues that in the meetings I see the Prime Minister, which are some of the meetings in which we discuss the most sensitive matters that the state has to deal with at a time when the world is incredibly unstable, the Prime Minister is taking really big decisions and he's making the right calls. And this doesn't feel like the time to be changing our Prime Minister, if you ask me.
And the problem is he's telling alleged porky pies, which is why there's this pork pie plot.
Well, I'm not sure. I think the connection that John made in his report was it was to do with the Melton Mowbray constituency rather than that. But I see your point. I just think that the Prime Minister has given his account of things. He did so at the dispatch box, which all ministers take very seriously, that when they stand up at the dispatch box, they have a responsibility to be absolutely accurate in what they say. Others have contested that version of events and have said they're willing to do so on oath. We all wait to see what Sue Gray has heard and the conclusions that she makes.
Yeah, he went into the garden, he saw people gathered, and he said he didn't think to ask why they were there in his garden.
Yeah, I think that this, to most people who don't hang around in Downing Street and haven't seen the way that the Prime Minister's day is put together, that will sound absurd. But the reality is that the Prime Minister's day is put together in 5-minute blocks. I spent 6 months as his parliamentary private secretary, running around in Downing Street and around Westminster behind him. And it is the most extraordinary job. You can bounce from a National Security Council meeting straight into a meeting with fellow ministers on a domestic policy issue, straight into a phone call with a foreign leader, and then someone comes and grabs you from your office and takes you down to the garden, and in the 30 seconds that takes to go down the stairs, you get a pre-brief on what is going on.
Yeah, and during the 25 minutes that you're there, Minister, you see a trestle table full of peanuts and Pinot Grigio, and you don't think, I make the rules, and I'm sure that's against those rules.
Well, I think in the Prime Minister's statement, he acknowledged that when he was there, he realised and he said in hindsight he should have stopped it there and then.
So he did break the rules?
Well, he made his statement. It is for Sue Gray to determine whether or not...
You just said, Minister, with all due respect, you just suggested that he broke the rules because he realised that it was against the rules. So he went back inside and left everybody else outside quaffing their white wine.
What I did is reflected on the statement that the Prime Minister made to Parliament the other day, and I repeated his words.
Nobody told me, you said. Nobody told me I was breaking the rules. He makes the rules.
Well, as I said, I can perfectly imagine from having worked closely with him and in Number 10 exactly how this happened. He will have been grabbed from his office at the end of a busy day of very significant decisions around the pandemic and everything else that was going on in the world, and will have been launched into an event which he himself said at the dispatch box, in hindsight, he should have shut down immediately.
Yeah, but he didn't, and as a result, he broke the rules.
And he has apologised for what happened.
That's not enough, though, is it? He broke the law.
Well,
He was at a party with 40 people in the garden.
We are all keen to understand exactly what happened and whether or not it was breaking the law. And
if it was?
We are waiting for the Sue Gray report to come back.
And if it was, then what happens?
Well, I think let's see what the report says, and I'm happy to come back on and offer my reflections then.
Very straightforward question, Minister, if you don't mind me putting it to you again. If a Prime Minister breaks the law, does he have to step down?
Well, I don't want to get into hypotheticals.
Why not?
Simply because I know how these things work, and what ends up being is, in answering your hypothetical question with a hypothetical
It's not hypothetical.
answer,
if a Prime Minister breaks the law, it looks as though this Prime Minister has broken the law. I've given you some of the facts. If he's broken the law, should he step down because he has misled Parliament, if he has broken the law?
I think it is perfectly reasonable to wait for Sue Gray's report to come back, and then for each and every Member of Parliament and Member of the Government to reflect on the conclusions of that report.
Not everybody's as supportive as you are, not only these pork piers, but Rishi Sunak, his Chancellor, who lives next door, where one of the photographs we've seen from the garden was taken from. He left so quickly yesterday at the end of an interview, he forgot to take his microphone off. It doesn't sound as though he has complete faith in the Prime Minister, does it?
I think everybody in government, everybody in Parliament is acutely concerned about what has happened and the reaction of the public. Our boss is not the Prime Minister. Our boss is those who send us to Westminster to represent us, and they are furious at what they have heard. And so it doesn't surprise me in the slightest that every single member of the government, every single member of the party is balancing those two loyalties, their loyalty to a Prime Minister who has made some really fantastic decisions over the last year in making the choices over the vaccination programme, in making some brave choices before Christmas around Omicron, in making some brave choices about the way we intervene in our economy.
Aware of all of that, Minister. Do you have some sympathy with the pork pie MPs who were elected in 2019? They went home to their constituencies last weekend and they were absolutely battered on the doorstep by furious constituents. Do you have some sympathy with them?
Well, we all were. I have sympathy with every colleague because this is not easy. But I just reflect that our economy is in the best shape. Our route out of the pandemic seems more certain than for many other countries. And the thing that absolutely nobody is talking about right now, and yet is the top of my inbox every morning here in the Ministry of Defence, is that two major industrialised Tier 1 militaries are
I'm not sure that's the top of your inbox. If you're looking at your constituent, I'm sure.
Well,
I'm sorry, I can't accept that. I really can't accept that,
I said the top
Minister.
of my
I'm sure
inbox
that's
here
not
in
the
the
case.
MOD.
You're a constituency MP.
I said the top of my inbox here in the MOD is Ukraine.
OK. Talk to me about the red meat that's being tossed around in the House of Commons at the moment. The plan ridiculed yesterday by MPs when we were talking about the suggestion that boats should be taken into the Channel and sonar and all sorts of things aimed at them to try to get them to go back whence they came.
No, I think the ridicule was on something different. I was discounting what you've just described as a method of intercepting or deterring.
Yeah, and do you think it's a good idea?
What, using a sonic cannon?
Yeah.
No, I said so in the Commons yesterday.
OK, so why was it even touted?
Well, I think that there has been...
By your government?
Well, I think people have been looking at all and every option, but the Prime Minister has asked the MOD and the Royal Navy to now take primacy over operations in the Channel. And in our view, that is not a method that we think will be remotely useful in tackling the challenge that we've been set.
One thing we should applaud is the service personnel who did their absolute best to get as many people out of Afghanistan as quickly as possible as that regime began to crumble, and you're going to honour them today.
We are, and I think that that is right. 1,000 people will receive a medal for their service during Operation Pitting. Those who remember back to August will remember the most extraordinary pictures brought to us most harrowingly by your own correspondent. We had men and women who were having to fly planes onto a runway that they knew was insecure. We had extraordinary soldiers stood outside the Baron Hotel having one hand on a rifle and taking people's babies with the other hand. I spent some time in the military. I won a number of medals, but I did so for 6-month tours. This was 14 days of the most extraordinary intensity, the most extraordinary danger, and required the most extraordinary compassion. And I think it's entirely right that the air crews and the soldiers and sailors and aviators that served in Kabul during Op Pitting will be recognised by Her Majesty the Queen.
Just a thought before I let you go, back to UK politics. I'm reading in my morning newspaper that power firms have, energy firms have given their bad debt to debt collectors, and they've gone round to people's homes to say, we want our money. 27% of homes are likely to be in fuel poverty as a result of the increase in fuel prices by April, by the spring. It cannot be right that we're sending debt collectors round, can it? Surely you'll look at that.
Well, it sounds to me as it's the energy companies, not the government, but I share your concern that that is the case at a time when families are very concerned about the cost of living. There are interventions the government has made through the price cap, which remains in place, and the 500 million household support fund. And I know the business secretary is looking at what more needs to be done. But I would hope that just as the government is seeking to turn every stone in order to help people with the cost of living challenge, so too the energy companies might show people a bit of slack if they're struggling to pay their bills.
OK, it's good to talk to you this morning. We always appreciate you taking the time to join us. Thank you. Hopefully see you in the studio next time. Quick question, do you like pork pies?
Yeah, although I'm not sure it's necessarily the first thing I'll grab off the supermarket shelf, but if I'm offered one, I'll have a slice.
Northern as I am. There's nothing better than a Melton Mowbray pork pie. Trust me, you should try it. A bit of mustard on the side. Fabulous. I look forward to seeing you soon, Minister. Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye. Boris Johnson will come under more scrutiny in the House of Commons this afternoon. There will be full and live coverage of Prime Minister's questions here on Sky News at 12 o'clock. And I know that lots of you were fascinated by that last week. We'll wonder what the Prime Minister has to say for himself this morning. Find out at midday exactly here on Sky News. Before all that, though, how much are your bills going up? Let's find out. Helen Ann's here. Hi, good morning.
Good morning. Well, look, it's yet another month where we sit here and say that the data is backing up very much what families are already feeling, that the cost of things is rising and it's rising very quickly. So the CPI we're looking at, the Consumer Price Index, it's the standard cost of an average basket of goods and services, and it rose by 5.4% in the 12 months to December. That, Kate, is the largest inflation rise in 30 years, which is really significant. And it's actually, I think, the third time in a row that I've sat here, the third month in a row I've sat here to you and said it's higher than what economists predicted as well. I think they expected it to be about 5.2%. It's radically above the Bank of England's target at 2%. So really a sense that this cost of living crisis we're seeing that so many families are facing continues, unfortunately. The other reason why it's so significant is we found out just yesterday as well that the rate of inflation has now outstripped the rate of wage rises. And of course, that really matters because inflation and price rises can be managed a bit as long as wages are rising in line with them. We found out yesterday that in November, actually workers had a real terms pay cut of 1%. And given that that was just November, unfortunately, that's probably set to continue in the months to come. There's a few drivers to all this. The price of energy we know a lot about, the price of fuel, the price of food, all going up. And the Bank of England, again, they have the tool of raising interest rates, the one tool they have to try and keep some of this heat out of the economy. They did raise them just a little bit in December, but they'll also want to look at keeping them low because that's how the economy is supported out of difficult times, and it has been difficult times. So a very difficult balancing act for them.
Okay.
Certainly the government, I think, will be concerned about these.
Helena, thanks very much indeed. Thanks a lot. Still to come on the programme for you. This morning, we'll speak to the Shadow Business Secretary, Jonathan Reynolds, about the rising cost of living and continued pressure mounting on the government over allegations of parties during lockdown. We'll also be getting reaction to that from Tony Blair's former Director of Communications, and that, of course, is Alistair Campbell. And what impact is the rising cost of living crisis having on Britain's food banks? Chatting to Taz Khan, founder of the London Community Kitchen, to find out. Well, outside of the problems he faces as a result of those parties in Downing Street, the Prime Minister is expected to update Parliament this afternoon on the government's plans to relax Plan B COVID restrictions in England. Our science and technology editor, Tom Clark, has spoken to the director of the Wellcome Trust and former government advisor, Sir Jeremy Farrar, about what restrictions he thinks should still remain in place.
I wouldn't lift everything at the end of January when the NHS is still under pressure and we're still in the middle, of course, of winter. So I would cautiously lift much of Plan B at the end of January, but I would keep masks in place in public transport and indoor places.
Looking at the latest COVID data for you, should we have a quick look? And this is what France has reported: close to 500,000 new coronavirus cases. That compares to what you can see on the screen. 94,000 new cases in the UK, 438 new deaths. The total UK deaths, 152,513. A legal challenge is to be launched in the Welsh Government over its mandatory COVID pass policy. Civil Liberties campaign group Big Brother Watch is seeking a judicial review of the scheme, which they say is discriminatory. Now, breakfast time. Have a quick look at these images. 007 of the former Health Secretary in the Telegraph. Mr Hancock was pictured going for a dip in the Serpentine in London's Hyde Park yesterday while out on his morning run. A member of the Lakes Swimming Club said the MP definitely broke the rules with the impromptu swim, saying swimming in the lakes is for members only. Well, the Express also has the story with the twist. They make the comparison with the former Bond star Daniel Craig, saying the former Health Secretary has a licence to chill. We'll let you make up your own minds on that and let me know what you think on Twitter @KBurley. Mr Hancock spent plenty of time in number 10, but is the party over for those in Downing Street? The Guardian this morning with this telling shot of a street cleaner, a street sweeper, at a scene of the alleged rule-breaking parties. First ships carrying emergency aid to Tonga have left New Zealand 5 days after that devastating underwater volcanic eruption. Let's take a closer look at the impact on the islands making up of Tonga. Around 100,000 live on Tonga's many islands. The underwater volcano erupted on Saturday in an area which is uninhabited. Tonga's capital is said to have suffered limited to moderate damage with some flooding. The Haipai group of islands has seen extensive damage, with all but the largest buildings destroyed or severely damaged. The greatest fears are for smaller islands, including the islands of Mango, with an entire village reportedly destroyed. Catastrophic damage was also reported on the island of Atata, as our Southeast Asia correspondent Siobhan Robbins reports.
This is what it sounds like when a volcano erupts.
It was kind of like bombs were just going off around the place, so we knew that something catastrophic had happened. We knew it was a volcano, but we knew it was so far away. It was just surprising that it was actually shaking the buildings here. You know, concrete buildings were shaking with these explosions.
Tonga's tsunami and volcano have caused catastrophic damage, destroying whole villages on some islands.
we're kind of in the dark. There's no effective communication between the islands. We're just kind of in this state of a fearful limbo, really.
The focus is now on getting aid to those in need. The US, the latest country to pledge support.
They save these to collect rainwater.
This warehouse in California is gathering essentials. Water supplies have been contaminated, so that's a priority. But falling ash is causing delays.
International airport needs to be clear. The landing strip, unfortunately, is covered with volcanic eruption ash. So that's a huge challenge for any plane to land in Tonga. And we have hundreds of volunteers that are working with the frontliners and also emergency work to clean up.
Australia and New Zealand have already started sending ships. On board, food, shelter and expert teams to assess the damage. But COVID-free Tonga is cautious. Supplies may be quarantined.
We can support by air if possible, and if their COVID arrangements can take account of providing humanitarian aid, that we would help with water, because that is the immediate demand, as well as communications.
As further surveillance flights are readied, the first international aid is due to arrive on Friday, almost a week after disaster struck.
Well, Siobhan joining us now with the very latest, live from Bangkok, actually. Hello to you, Siobhan. We don't know about the death toll because it is a long way away from anywhere, really, isn't it? And the ships are on their way, but it still could take some time.
Yes, that's right. It's actually fairly positive news so far. I just spoke to an aid worker who said that some of her team had managed to go to some of those outer lying areas which are really badly affected. They noticed and took note of all of the buildings that have been destroyed, but so far it appears on the surface that thousands of people have managed to get to safety. We know that the death toll officially is 3. As you say, that could change, but the big focus now is on getting fresh water to the people on the island. New Zealand is bringing 250,000 litres on one of the ships it's sending. It will then be able to make another 70,000 litres with resources that it has on board. But really, because many of the people on Tonga collect rainwater, which has either been polluted by ash or by salt water when the tsunami came in, getting fresh water to them is really the focus now.
OK, thank you. Thanks a lot, Siobhan. Thank you. Looking at today's other headlines for you now, let's start with the Ukraine, should we? US Secretary of State Antony Blinken has arrived in Kiev for talks with Ukraine's president. Russia has sent around 100,000 troops toward its border with Ukraine, with US officials saying yesterday they believe that Russia was capable of launching an attack. Antony Blinken is set to meet his Russian counterpart in Geneva on Friday.
Every single day they're listening to this shooting. This war has been going on for years now.
Our chief correspondent Stuart Ramsey has visited a village on the front line of the Ukraine-Russia conflict with only 11 remaining residents. You can catch more from his latest report on the Sky News website. A man in his 30s has been arrested in connection with the murder of Aisling Murphy. Ms Murphy was found dead after going for a run on the banks of the Grand Canal in Tullamore last Wednesday. The arrest comes after the 23-year-old teacher was memorialised at her funeral mass at St Bridget's Church in Mount Bolus yesterday. Former Colombian Senator Ingrid Betancourt has announced that she will contest the presidential election in May, 20 years after being kidnapped by left-wing rebels. Ms Betancourt was abducted by the Marxist FARC rebel group and was held hostage for more than 6 years before being freed, by the army. 2 US mobile networks have agreed to limit the rollout of their new 5G service following safety concerns from airline bosses. Boeing and Airbus fear the mobile technology may interfere with sensitive airline instruments, rendering aircraft unusable. Over to Canada, where a woman's been rescued after she crashed through the ice on a river in Manotick. She was seen speeding across the Rideau River in Ontario before her vehicle sank. My goodness. She was able to climb to safety and for some reason took a selfie before she was rescued by onlookers who had to get to her by kayak. She's been charged with dangerous driving, and police warned people in their region to keep their cars on the road and not on the ice. And this next story gives walking in a winter wonderland a whole new meaning. Here we go. A dangerous storm made landfall in the US East Coast on Monday, bringing in heavy snowfall and thunderstorms. Meteorologists say a foot or more of snow fell in parts of New York and Ohio, prompting motorists in Cleveland to grab their shovels and basically just start digging. The weather caused power outages and hundreds of flight cancellations. Looking at our top stories for you this morning on the programme, Prime Minister will face PMQs later today, knowing that his job is on the line as pressure mounts over Downing Street parties. Separate to that, Mr Johnson is also expected to address Parliament this afternoon about his plan to relax Plan B COVID restrictions in England. And emergency aid leaves for Tonga amid warnings continued ashfall has contaminated much of the country's water supply. More now on our top story. Boris Johnson facing increasing pressure from his own MPs over the Downing Street parties. Earlier, the Armed Forces Minister told me that even though he understands why people at home may feel angry, it's not the right time to be changing PM.
I suspect there's lots of colleagues who are reflecting on what they've heard in their constituencies and are feeling under a lot of pressure right now because the British public are absolutely furious with what they've heard. The Prime Minister has apologised. I can tell colleagues that in the meetings I see the Prime Minister, which are some of the meetings in which we discuss the most sensitive matters that the state has to deal with at a time when the world is incredibly unstable, the Prime Minister is taking really big decisions and he's making the right calls. And this doesn't feel like the time to be changing our Prime Minister, if you ask me.
Tomorrow's here, the pork pie plot. What's it all about?
Yes, James Heappey was saying it's not time to change the Prime Minister. Quite a lot of the newly elected 2019 MPs, don't forget, make up about a third of the Conservative Party now in Parliament, those elected in 2019, met yesterday. The ringleader of that is said to be the MP Alicia Cairns, who represents the area of Rutland and Melton.
This is her?
There she is. Yeah, I'll introduce you to a few of the so-called plotters. She's an ambitious MP. She was very critical of Dominic Cummings over the Barnard Castle issue. She is not in the so-called red wall, the northern seats that the Conservatives won
rather
for the first
posh Rutland.
time.
She's
Rutland, and that's why it's been called the pork pie plot, because Melton Mowbray, home of pork pies, is in her constituency. She is one of them. Another name that has been mentioned in connection to this is Deanna Davidson. Now, she was very much the sort of poster girl of the 2019 victory. She took Bishop Auckland in the northeast with a huge majority. Boris Johnson and Carrie Johnson campaigned with her. She's been very high profile in the media. There she is with Mrs Johnson. She is very much on the right of the party. She's said to be one of those who is now gunning for the Prime Minister. And another
fellow dog lover, I think.
It would seem so, yes. Yeah. And she's very young, still in her 20s, also very ambitious. And another one of those 20 is Christian Wakeford. Now, he has actually confirmed to us that he has put in a letter to ask the Prime Minister to resign.
And what does that mean?
So, in order to trigger a leadership challenge, you need MPs to send letters calling for him to resign. And if 15% of MPs do that, which currently will be 54 Conservative MPs, send letters to Graham Brady. Only he knows how many there are. MPs will tell you there are 20 or 30 or 40, but they don't actually know. Only Graham Brady knows.
And Graham Brady is something called the chairman of the 1922
That's right.
Committee,
1922 committee is all Conservative MPs. Backbenchers MPs. Now, when he has 15% of the party, so when he has 54 letters, he will say there is a leadership challenge. And what happens at that stage is that there is a vote of confidence in the Prime Minister in Parliament. So say we reached 54 today, which some of the 2019 MPs think think they are nearly there and are planning to send in their letters after Prime Minister's questions. If they reach the threshold, there'll be a vote of confidence in the Prime Minister. Now, at that stage, there's a much higher bar because half of all Conservative MPs, which would be 181 Conservative MPs, would have to vote against him in order to eject him from office. So remember with Theresa May, the letters went in, it was 48 needed at that stage. They had the vote of no confidence and she won. And if you win, no one can challenge you again for another year.
So what happened with her?
So she stayed until she decided to go because she couldn't get her Brexit deal through Parliament. So it is a bad situation for a Prime Minister to have a leadership challenge like this, but even if the 54 letters go in, which would be a sign of the very wide discontent with Boris Johnson across the Conservative Party, it doesn't mean he's a goner because, of course, there is still that vote in Parliament and you can imagine that Boris Johnson would be fighting that very hard.
Thanks for unpacking that for us, Tamara. That's really complicated. You made it very simple, but basically he's in a lot of trouble.
He's in a lot of trouble, but is it going to be terminal? It all depends on the numbers. In politics, you have to know how to count, and of course, the whips will be desperately counting how many of them are putting their heads above the parapet.
OK, thanks very much. Let's bring in Tony Blair's former Director of Communications, should we? Alistair Campbell, of course, we chatted to you last week. How do you think it's looking compared to last week, Mr Campbell? Good morning.
Well, I think it's looking a lot worse for Johnson, but it's just a week in which the reputation of our country has just been dragged through the mud yet again. And all of these Conservative MPs who you've just shown they're smiling with Johnson and laughing with Johnson and celebrating his arrival in Downing Street, they knew what they were getting. This idea that suddenly, wow, we've just discovered that Boris Johnson tells lies. Boris Johnson was a proven liar before he got to number 10. And I honestly think that these MPs are only thinking about their own interests now. They're thinking about will it help me to stay as an MP if he stays or goes. They're not thinking about the national interest. Some of them might be, but most of them are not. They're making personal political calculations. They're damaging the country. They're damaging themselves. He is a terrible Prime Minister. He is the worst Prime Minister we've ever had. And he's got to go. And surely they can see that. And surely they can see that the longer they help him hang on, the more they damage themselves as well.
Still beat Labour, though, didn't he?
He did. He did. And, you know, that is what they thought they got. They thought they'd got a winner because he'd won the London mayoralty, because he won the Brexit referendum, and then he won the general election. But what we're seeing now is what happens when you put somebody in that position when they have the wrong qualities for leadership and to be Prime Minister of a great country like the United Kingdom. He's got
Brexit, and Theresa May couldn't. Delivered
that.
Brexit, Theresa May couldn't.
Well, listen, let me just say this about Brexit, Kay. They keep saying that the two great things that he's done are the vaccine rollout and got Brexit done. Brexit is proving to be an unmitigated disaster for the country. Our record on COVID is nothing to be proud of, with the death rates and the economic hit and all the rest that we've done. There's nothing there. And these Tory MPs, I mean, it's tragic for the country that as over the last decade and before that, when they were jockeying to get the right people in positions of power, it's always been about the interests of the Conservative Party. And it is again now. That is the calculation that is driving the politics of our country. Yep. And I hope that people realise when Johnson goes, which he will, I hope they realise this is not just about him. This lot have had a decade. They've had more than a decade. We'll be on to our fourth Conservative Prime Minister. And what has this country achieved in the last decade that they can take credit for?
He
Frankly,
oversaw the furlough scheme, didn't he? And, you know, he made sure that a lot of people kept their jobs when there was considerable concern during the pandemic. He made sure that people were being paid.
Well, look, you know, the pandemic was difficult for every government to manage. But this idea that they came up with these great ideas, and don't forget, just two days ago, they've written off £4.3 billion in fraud. Now, would that have happened if that had been benefit fraud? I don't think so. Kay, I know you've got to put the other side when you've got somebody like me on here, and I get that. This is the worst government of our lifetime. We have the worst Prime Minister of our lifetime. We have somebody who is provenly dishonest, provenly all about himself, provenly lacking integrity. And the sooner he's gone, the better. The sooner he's gone for the country, that's the most important thing. But I say to all these Tory MPs who are having their sleepless nights and is it the right thing to do and will it help me win my seat or lose my seat and all that, do the right thing. Just for once, find a spine, do the right thing, tell him to go and he'll be gone.
Yeah, and if he goes, then Downing Street will once again be full of old Etonians, some might say, and that as a result, they will lose their red wall seats, which is why a lot of MPs are still doddering about and dithering about what they should do.
Well, that's for them to do. I'm just saying do the right thing. Is this guy, as Prime Minister, and this cabinet, are they good for the country or not? And all they've got to say is he got Brexit done, which is a disaster, and he's done the vaccine rollout, which has been good up to the point of recent weeks where actually we're now in the middle of the pack in the world. Now, he's a terrible Prime Minister. That is the only thing that matters here. And this idea, I was just reading a column in one of the German newspapers, right? They're saying they find it incredible that he became Prime Minister. What they also find incredible is that it takes a party to tell us that he's so terrible. He's lied about far bigger things than this. This is a guy who lied to the Queen, don't forget, about prorogation of Parliament. This is the guy who lied to the country about Brexit. And long after he's gone, the consequences, we're going to be playing them out in the damage to our economy, the damage to our public services, the damage to our standing in the world. You've got a situation developing in Ukraine at the moment, right? We are irrelevant. Our Prime Minister in the situation in Ukraine is irrelevant to the world. Biden, Putin, do you think they're even thinking about what the British Prime Minister thinks about it? No.
Well,
it's
not necessarily a fair fight, that, because, of course, Putin, we know what he'll do if people are up against him, and Biden's in the middle of his presidency, so he doesn't need to worry about staying in power. Let me just ask you very quickly before I let you go, though. Let me just ask you quickly before I let you go, as far as Sue Gray is concerned, there's trash talking of Sue Gray has already started, which to me seems anything but fair. She's trying to do her job to the best of her ability. Is it fair to have put a senior civil servant in to take part in this investigation when she's basically investigating her boss? Was it fair and reasonable to put her in that position to start with?
Of course it's not. And it's typical. Why did Sue Gray get put into that position? Because the guy that he put into it in the first place, the cabinet secretary, who's disappeared off the face of the earth, so far as I can tell, he had to recuse himself because he was at one of these wretched parties. And by the way, this thing about a drinking culture in Downing Street, I never saw anybody drunk in Downing Street ever in the years that I worked there. I can't even remember attending a party other than an official one. And Sue Gray is a very committed, diligent public servant. To put her in this position where he wants her basically to sort of just say, say something that allows him to get away with it, he's using her. It just adds to the long list of disreputable, dishonest things that he's done. And I hope, for Sue Gray's sake, I like Sue Gray, I think she's a very, very good woman. I hope for her sake that actually he's gone before she has to submit this report.
Okay.
And the people who should be looking into this are not Sue Gray, it's the police. He's committed a crime inside Downing Street, and it should be the police that look into this.
Allegedly. I'm going to throw that in there before the lawyers do. Good to talk to you. Thanks very much, Alistair. Thank you.
All the best.
You too. Rising inflation figures, energy bills and tax rises conspire to squeeze household income. Extra pressure is mounting on Britain's food banks as more families struggle to keep up. Joining us to discuss the impact of living costs on food banks is Taz Khan, founder of the London Community Kitchen. Hi, Taz. Thanks for joining us on the programme this morning. More and more people are in full food and fuel poverty. Is that being reflected where you are?
Good morning, Kay. Thanks for having us on. Yes, indeed. It is being reflected. We are seeing an unprecedented increase in numbers in all the boroughs that we operate in. And we are finding a new group of people that are visiting us, people that are actually finding themselves that are in full-time employment, but just not able to make it through the month.
How are you coping with that?
Well, we have to work a lot harder, and furlough has ended. People are going back to work. A lot of people are finding themselves in unemployment, and we are also struggling with volunteers because life is trying to go back to normality, but I think this is the new norm. We're finding ourselves in a new territory here.
And what about enough food? Are you getting enough supplies to make sure that everybody who needs to put food in their belly is able to?
Yeah, so some weeks we do. Over Christmas, we got a large amount of food that we could redistribute to communities, but we are struggling with fresh fruit produce. It's a bit of a grim story in London at the moment.
And Taz, are you receiving any support from the government or your local council, which I'm guessing is Harrow?
Yeah, so Harrow Council has supported us, so has a couple of the other London boroughs, including Brent. But we're seeing that support being more and more thin. It was quite strife during the pandemic, but now there's an expectancy to just kind of like get on with it. But I really feel that, you know, it's a boiling pot and it needs to be addressed, because the situation is only going to get a lot worse in the coming months, especially with all these increases in fuels and energy prices, which are affecting every single average household that we support.
But if you can, you will help, and people can come along on Fridays, can't they?
Absolutely. We're always here for Londoners, and we will continue to support them to our best abilities.
OK, good to talk to you as always. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Kate. Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye for now. Now we'll have the latest as Amnesty International warns competitors and delegates alike heading to next month's Beijing Winter Olympics not to become complicit in a propaganda exercise. That to come. Hello again, everybody. Amnesty International has warned competitors and delegates heading to the Beijing Winter Olympics not to become complicit in a propaganda exercise by the Chinese government. The human rights organisation accuses China of persecuting Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang and restricting freedom of speech in Hong Kong. Let's find out more about it, should we? Tom standing by in Beijing. A lot of countries, certainly as far as the diplomats are concerned, are saying we're not coming.
Yeah, morning, Kay. That's correct. There is this diplomatic boycott, but there are athletes going, even if the politicians won't be. And they've been put in a pretty tricky position. Amnesty saying they should be allowed to put their opinion out there, that the freedom of speech should be guaranteed. I think this is something Beijing is alive to. Just recently, an official who's organising the Games says that any behaviour or speech that is against the Olympic spirit, especially against the Chinese laws and regulations, should be punished. There is an element of threat there. The punishment isn't specified. It could be according to the Olympic regulations, but that mention of Chinese laws will make athletes a bit more wary about speaking out. It is a very tricky position for them to be in. They just want to go there. There's enough pressure competing at the Olympics, but it's the IOC, the International Olympic Committee, that's chosen Beijing as the host and put them there. OK, for now, thank you. Thanks a lot, Tom. Well, let's talk about it in more detail, should we? Joining us now from Amnesty International UK Chief Executive, Sasha Deshmukh. Hello to you. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on the programme this morning. What are your concerns about China hosting the Winter Olympics?
Having me. The Beijing Winter Olympics are taking place in a dire and worsening human rights situation in China. You know, you highlighted just a few of the situations in your introduction. We're talking about at least 1 million Uyghur Muslims who are being held in internment camps. We're talking about the persecution of sexual assault victims who speak up about their experience, the systematic persecution of lawyers and other people talking about human rights. And we could go on and on and on. The Olympics are being used by the Chinese government as an attempt to sports wash this terrible human rights record. And really, this diplomatic boycott, while welcome, should only be the start of the communication from governments, from all of us, around the issues of human rights and just how seriously we take human rights in China and how we don't think that this is acceptable.
Looking at Beijing Olympics pictures, that was the last time, of course, they were on the world stage. Talking about the Winter Olympics now. And I suppose that the obvious next question is, do you think that the athletes shouldn't go?
Well, I understand that different athletes will take different positions about how they want to participate. And I just want to say that, you know, I think all of us admire enormously the dedication, the skill, you know, the perseverance of athletes who want to, who train for years to participate in the Olympics. What I think is key, and especially given one of the major issues of human rights in China is freedom of expression, is there are a number of athletes who feel very strongly about human rights issues, want to speak up appropriately. And let's be clear, the IOC regulations do say that athletes can talk about the issues that they believe in media, in social media. And there are a number of athletes who want to do that. They need to know that they're protected in doing so. They're protected. They need to be protected by the Olympic authorities, both the International Olympic authorities, but also the British Olympic authorities, and know that they have all of our backs, as their supporters here in the UK as well.
Sasha, is freezing out China the right way of dealing with alleged human rights abuses?
Well, I think what we're talking about is a real need to expose and to look in scrutiny, and for governments to be clear about what's happening in China. In some ways, I think the issues are that the Chinese government has been denying that there have been human rights abuses, has been denying access, has been denying visibility to what's happening. And actually governments, and clearly I think particularly the UK government, given where we are now, need to be calling out what's happening themselves, but actually also calling for proper examination, proper action in relation to what's happening. So I think the enforcement of international law, the enforcement of the standards by which all countries are expected to behave, that's the right action. And it clearly is something that's going to take strong action, strong force, strong communication by all of us, strong campaigning. Amnesty International has launched a campaign to free the 5, and clearly there are many more than 5 people affected by human rights in China. But these are 5 very critical cases. Just to give one example, if you think about your viewers watching this show and how much you've had to, they've relied on you to communicate about COVID. One of those 5 people, Zhang Jian, was sentenced to 4 years imprisonment simply for reporting on the COVID pandemic in China. And there are 4 other cases of other human rights violations in that campaign. I think all of us need to be very vocal, and it's campaigns such as these, and clearly much deeper and loud and clear action by governments, including the UK, that is the right way to engage, and frankly, what's absolutely needed for a situation that is getting worse.
OK. Sasha, we must leave it there, but it's good to talk to you. Thank you for taking the time to join us. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Still to come in the next hour of the programme, we are going to be talking about a Prime Minister under increasing pressure. The pork pie plot is what we are being told about. I'll tell you why it's called that in the next hour. It's quite intriguing. But basically, they've all gathered against him most of the 2019 intake of MPs because of what happened, they say, in the garden of Downing Street. Stay tuned for more on the programme this morning. Please stay tuned.